Welcome to RESOLUT REveal, the podcast where we reveal insights, trends, and opportunities in commercial real estate. I'm Ray Kang with David Simmonds and Martin Turner, and in this episode, we're diving into a topic that every landlord and tenant should be paying attention to: the role of a CRE broker in leasing. In reality, it's a complex process with real financial consequences if done incorrectly. But before we dive in, let's kick things off with a quick market update on Houston retail, what's trending, and what we are seeing in the market right now. Houston, a powerhouse retail market that continues to evolve despite shifting economic conditions. With RESOLUT RE having a strong presence in the Houston metro, we're here to break down the key market movements, investment trends, and what's ahead for retail real estate in one of the nation's fastest growing cities. Houston's retail market remains resilient with a vacancy rate of 5.4% as of Q4 2024, reflecting a stable environment for both landlords and tenants. Despite challenges, the market has maintained equilibrium with net absorption of 389,336 square feet in Q3 2024, indicating steady leasing activity. Over 1 million square feet of new retail space was delivered in Q3 2024, showcasing ongoing development efforts to meet consumer demand. However, the construction pipeline has decreased by 27% year over year, with 3.3 million square feet currently underway, suggesting a cautious approach by developers. Asking rents have reached a record high, averaging $20.87 per square foot, an 8.3% increase year over year, highlighting the competitiveness of the market. Investment sales totaled $574 million over the past 12 months, with an average price of $246 per square foot, reflecting sustained investor interest in Houston's retail properties. The market has seen a mix of expansions and closures. Trader Joe's plans to open a new store in Kingwood, enhancing its presence in the Houston area. Conversely, Joann Fabric and Crafts is closing 4 Houston area stores as part of a nationwide reduction, reflecting the evolving retail landscape. Downtown Houston is undergoing significant revitalization with plans to transform 7 blocks of Main Street into a pedestrian-only corridor, aiming to enhance the area's appeal and support mixed-income housing and vibrant retail options. Houston's outlet centers, such as Houston Prime Outlets and Katy Mills Mall, continue to attract shoppers with new store openings and unique features, contributing to the city's diverse retail offerings. Houston's retail market demonstrates resilience amid a dynamic economic environment. With strategic developments, a balance of expansions and closures, and proactive revitalization efforts, the city is poised for continued growth. At RESOLUT RE, we're committed to leveraging our expertise to navigate this evolving landscape, providing our clients with unparalleled insights and opportunities in the Houston metro area. We are RESOLUT RE, representing over 800 commercial properties and 300 tenants, providing exceptional service in leasing, sales, and advisory. Our clients rely on us so they can succeed. Visit us at resolutre.com. That's resolute without the E, re.com. Welcome back to the show, and we're so glad to have you here again. I'm Ray Kang, here with David Simmonds and Martin Turner, episode 2 of our podcast, RESOLUT REveal, where we're revealing insights, market trends, and other good information for our clients. Today, we're going to be talking about common leasing challenges without a broker and some of our insights with that and some of our experiences. And we're going to cover both the risks and opportunities for landlords and tenants. We have a long track record representing landlords and tenants to find the right space. So first off, guys, how you guys been and what's been going on with you?
Well, since we last talked, I went to the International Franchise Association annual event in Vegas, and it's a really good event. a little bit different from all the other franchise shows we go to in the sense that it's just the corporate execs, the franchisors versus franchisees. I mean, you'll see some franchisees, but very few and far between. The franchisors don't have booths. They're there mainly for education and networking, and just vendors have booths. And so got to talk to a lot of franchisors, some franchisees, other people in the business. Everybody seems very bullish. They have seen the impact, obviously, of interest rates and so forth. But overall, people are very positive and are looking forward to a good 2025 in franchising.
How does the attendance of that show compare with like ICSC Vegas?
Oh, it's tiny. It's somewhere around 5,000, if I had to guess, if that. Sorry, I didn't pay attention to the number, but overall, it's a much smaller convention than, say, something like an ICSC. Brokers don't really go to those shows, so that's a big component right there. And although there are vendors, there just aren't, a huge number of vendors. So it's a very captive audience. If you're in the franchising game in any way, and for us brokerage, it's a great captive audience, and we often get a lot out of the show.
Well, I think that's probably where we could start. Going to that show is to find franchisees and franchisors looking for space or locations for their brands or businesses, right? So do you want us to start talking about, tenants that try to find spaces on their own? Maybe we could highlight some of the mistakes of them doing that.
We particularly zoom in on, not only do we specialize in the franchise space, but also emerging brands. With our world-class analytics program and the turnkey brokerage services that we offer nationwide, and the fact that we're free of charge to the franchisors and franchisees, we make our money when deals get signed and landlords pay our commissions. Those are good targets for us. Oftentimes, or often enough, you will find these groups that real estate is a side thought, an afterthought. And so, they get the franchisee set up, and then it's up to them, go find a space. And there's a lot of, pitfalls with that, as far as, the consistency of, site criteria, be able to explain how operations work, because these guys are brand new in the business, and, just to overall be able to communicate the culture of the company. And then obviously, they don't know the market. People do not return their phone calls. We hear that time and time again. I'm not saying that's right, fair, or otherwise, but it's just the truth. And then a lot of times, they're picking cousin Jenny, who just got her license with RE/MAX, and who doesn't know, gosh, everything about retail. Every time I've seen these franchisees pick their own brokers, they do not have the specialization of retail restaurants. And with that, this market is so, we touched upon this last show, this market is so unbelievably tight nationwide that you just can't get cousin Jenny out there, looking for space. You can't just go out there looking yourself for space. You have to have the relationships. You have to have you have to know about the off-market opportunities. You have to know about the projects that are coming up next year, and the deal you found out about, from your buddy who you had beers with last Thursday. Cold calling, all the stuff that, and again, it's just relationships. It comes back to that. The number of times I've heard, new clients come on board to say, nobody will return my phone call. It's amazing how that works. Seemingly, people say this started 4 or 5 years ago after COVID, as far as landlords not delivering any new product or not nearly the amount of new product that we need for demand. I think it goes back a little bit further. If you look at the stats, 2017, 2018 with the Amazon effect, staggering decrease in space being delivered onto the market. It has, and then continued after COVID. It's a nightmare out there. It's like pushing water uphill. And so to take that on yourself, to find the space, it's pretty daunting, and an exercise in folly. Now, once you find the spaces and you start negotiating, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what market rents are. You don't know what you can get, with renewal options and what those renewal options rates should be. They don't know things about asking for exclusives, caps on the controllable portion of CAMs. To ask for reserved parking places, even though 99% of the time you don't get it, sometimes you do. And even if you don't, and they cross it out and you say, okay, you look like you're negotiating in good faith. To know about delivery, the rent commencement, the time it takes for construction. You could be getting 120 days, but, if it's going to take you 240, to get permits and to finish it out, well, then all of a sudden, you're paying rent for 4 months when you're not even open, which is a death nail for any business. How much do you ask for in construction allowance? By the way, okay, great. They're giving you $30. Well, have you gotten a contractor out there to tell you what it costs? If it's going to cost $65, does that extra $35 a square foot, blow up your budget? And yeah, you'd be surprised, just how many of these franchisors, they sign up these franchisees and just throw them out to the wolves, in regards to brokerage, in regards to construction. And it's, you're kicking off this huge relationship, this huge investment, only to get into a deep hole, with bad locations, with the amount of time it takes to find them, with construction, either being over budget or, not on your timeline for your pro forma. Every franchisee seems to put in their FDD that, they want 180 days from the time you sign the contract with the franchisor to the time that they open. They say 180 days. It's just such science fiction.
Yeah. I think David did a fantastic job of summarizing all the things that go into finding a site and doing your due diligence on it. One thing I would add is retail of all the commercial real estate categories is the one that location matters the most, right? Location, right? And it is all about where you place your business has an outsized impact on how you do as a company. An office, if you place your office at the wrong spot, your business is going to go on more or less as it would have in a different location. But in retail, your business will die if you choose the wrong location. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You can have the best people, the best operations, the best concept, but if you're not at an intersection with good access, you're going to die, And so the smallest little mistake can ruin you. And so it's that much more critical in the retail world to have a broker that knows these things and knows, the historical performance of tenants theirs and co-tenancy and all the other stuff that makes a huge difference. That's just a big, big factor in our world.
And that's the thing with, the advances in technology has come our ability to service our clients better. We do analytics on the front end and then we close with the real estate. These tools, tapestry segmentation, geofencing, where these companies are tracking us on their cell phones, where we're coming from, where we're going to, the roads most traveled. They're logging us as far as where we're going and how long we're staying there. This allows us to just, not go by instinct. They say analytics exist to either verify or validate or, refute instincts. And so, yes, you need that local market broker on the ground. Yes, you need the franchisee's input because normally they've lived there their whole lives. But the analytics is an essential part of, picking the areas we want to go into. And then once we determine that, tear the brokers loose, as far as to find space within those areas. So it's just, and plus you need those 6 degrees of separation, if I'm even saying that correctly. Just recently, we had a doctor, lovely human being, but, he wanted to get into a franchise business. It's in West Palm Beach, so tight market. And so we're looking for space and everything else. We zoom in on one, and the landlord rep is genuinely charming. There was nothing unauthentic about him. He was a pretty good broker. He's been doing this longer than I have. I've been doing this for 28 years. And, and we always tell our clients, let us handle all communications. It's for your best interest. We have your best interest in mind. They represent the landlord. They have the landlord's best interest in mind. So we're sort of midway through the negotiation, and the good doctor goes out there and meets with this landlord rep himself. And they walk the property, and they're talking about mainly the construction. There were some intricacies with the construction like there always is. And he came out of that meeting saying, everything went great as the good son. And, well, the TIs got cut in half. And the landlord broker had a good explanation for why that happened. But the doctor's just like, man, I should have listened to you. To his credit, he said, I should have listened to you. I should let y'all handle all communications. Because the doctor went out there and being the genuine human being that he is, he was just saying how much he loves the space, how much he loves the project, how excited he is to get the deal closed, this and the other, blah, 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 blah. Landlord rep, if he's doing his job, he's got to zoom in and take advantage of it accordingly. And plus when you're on the landlord side, or on the tenant side, if you act excited, if you act passionate, if you act aggressive to get a deal done, it looks like weakness on your part. Whereas if you have a broker doing that, they just look like a broker being a broker. It's like, oh, he's a broker. He's trying to get the deal done. So yeah, they're going to bug me every other day for lease comments. And then we also buffer emotions, a lot of emotions as far as, people get their feelings hurt or frustrated or whatever it is, we're able to absorb that, bring them down, and then, but also communicate the message in a much more professional tone so that we don't start getting the battle going back and forth and the deal dies.
You see that quite a bit where you get an owner of a property and the owner of a business on phone call to try and hash some stuff out. And then they start puffing their chest out at each other. And before you know it, they're just trying to prove who's the bigger boss, and your deal starts going south. And we've seen deals die over that. So not that there isn't a time and place to get the two parties together, that frequently does happen, but if you are negotiating a deal all by yourself, it's going to happen more often than it needs to, and the broker is a nice buffer there to play good cop, bad cop.
Have there been situations for either of you where the tenant that you want to help and work for, they just simply refuse to get you involved?
Yeah, absolutely. They have very unrealistic expectations about what we're supposed to be doing on the timeline we're supposed to be doing it within. I mean, they lose faith in you. They lose faith in the process. They determine that they're smarter than you are. They're not trying to cut ties with you or break the contract, but yeah, they just feel like they need to take the bull by the horns and get this thing done. Sometimes it goes just fine, but other times, no, it does not go fine at all. Because again, you don't know what you don't know. You have some of these, you got the first time franchisees who really know nothing. But then you have also these guys, who are buying businesses during the week, way above my pay grade. So I'm not saying I'm smarter than they are. It's just I've been doing this every day, all day for 28 years. So, I've learned a few things along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about like the infrastructure of a, brokerage business and all the collaboration that goes on behind the walls of that business. That's, that is our core business. So like, just yesterday, we're talking about a expanding tenant, and an email goes out, hey, have you guys dealt with this tenant before? And what can we get on these terms? And people can share their experiences, and that really does inform us of how and where we can push back. And if an owner is saying, hey, we just don't do that ever, but we happen to know that they do that and they do it frequently, they just have a habit of saying we don't do that ever. We know that's something that we can win on, and it's worth pushing forward. But we also know the reverse of that. Sometimes there are companies that just have hard and fast lines, whether or not it's a reasonable thing. There are companies that just will not do certain things. And we know, hey, we're going to lose this battle. Let's not push here. Let's push over here. And that maximizes value for the client.
Yeah, like recently, going back to the tenant side of the fence, again, these tenants get their feelings hurt pretty easily. Just recent conversation, they're like, why are they asking to see my sales? My sales are none of their business. They don't need to see, what do they need to see my sales for? Well, I said a couple of reasons. One, they want to gauge your health, throughout the term of the lease, so that they start seeing a nosedive in your sales. They start realizing ahead of time that, hey, we're probably going to have to release this space, instead of getting shocked and starting from, zero. That's another reason is that when they go to either sell the shopping center or refinance it, the lender / prospective seller are going to want to see the health of the tenants. So they don't buy the shopping center or refi at day one, and then, day 180, 3 tenants are out. So they got to be able to provide those stats to these lenders, to these buyers, in order to validate, the health of the shopping center. Oh, okay. Yeah, boom, done. Conversation done. No more hurt feelings. We're moving on, like Martin said, to the next however many issues that really need to be handled. So, personal guarantee, they want, these tenants want $50 a square foot in TIs, but they don't want to sign a personal guarantee. It's like, guys, you're a first time, franchisee, or even if they have, 4 or 5 units, it's like, this is like a loan. This is the bank underwriting your deal. Of course, they're going to want a personal guarantee. Now, will we do all that we can to mitigate that? Hopefully get you a 3-year personal guarantee with a 1-year rolling? Absolutely. We're going to fight for that. But you're not going to sign this lease under a shell corp with no personal guarantee.
Yeah, knowing the owner's situation and what their objectives are with the asset is a huge component too that, tenants wouldn't ordinarily think about. So there are some owners that are, longtime holders, and they're looking at this as their personal investment. And then there are other owners that are, just trying to flip the asset and move on to the next one. And they're going to look at risk in an entirely different way. The owner that's, just building the property and then going to sell it, a merchant developer, they're probably going to be a little looser with the pocketbooks. They're going to, not be afraid to fund a little more TI and be able to take a little more risk on, because they're not going to live with that tenant in the long term. And they're looking at it as a short-term investment. And if they know that if they can flip it on a cap rate, they can very quickly make back that money at a multiple. And so they might fund $60, $70 a foot in TI, where the person that's holding it long-term is going to say, no, it only makes sense for me to give this tenant $30, $40 a foot.
They say merchant developers order from the menu, and long-term holders, they have to stick around for the meals.
There's a lot of things to be aware of that, tenants may not be seeing. A lot of times when, people call on my listings on LoopNet as a broker, we're also trying to qualify tenants just on the get-go as well, right? Seeing if they're for real. And I think a lot of times, a lot of tenants, when they do call brokers, they complain they don't get calls back. Maybe sometimes those brokers just don't think they're even qualified to have them in the spaces.
If I can just back up a sec, is one of the perils also of somebody looking for space themselves or using an unqualified broker is, we don't have an MLS. We don't have a centralized listing system that people can go to and see the entire market. LoopNet is the closest thing out there, and it captures, a decent percentage of the market, but nowhere near the entire market. And oftentimes the best deals happen, before it even hits LoopNet. Somebody knows that a space is coming available. They call up their broker buddies and say, do you have anybody that fits the bill? And they've already got a deal working before the chance that they have to even, put the flyer on the market. And a lot of times they're not even allowed to put the flyer on the market because the owner says, hey, keep it quiet, but this space is coming available. And so I think that's folly number one is thinking that you even know what's on the market and what's out there, and that it doesn't really matter who's searching for you, because it has a huge outsized impact on the quality of space that you're going to get.
Yeah, if you're a tenant, and you start on LoopNet, okay, there commences the search process. And just to add a little bit more, not only does LoopNet not capture the whole market, but often the data is way outdated, and brokers purposely leave up those outdated flyers to serve as a fly trap, to bring in prospects, if they're the brokers that actually return calls. But like in Knoxville, Tennessee, for example, there is no centralized place for listings. They said she was telling me they have LoopNet, they have Crexy, and then she named two more that, obviously are very local. So they don't even have that centralized, nowhere near an MLS or even a LoopNet. And so, so they hit on LoopNet, they get a few people to call them back. They're guessing about where they need to go area-wise. They're looking at the co-tenants. Not a bad strategy, but not always the answer, especially if you're planning multiple locations. How do you space those apart? You don't want to go on Smith and Main if then, that's the only location you could do in the market, because originally you planned southwest and northeast. If you go on Smith and Main, you're splitting those markets. You can't do any more locations after that in that market. So they're guessing on the areas, going off of 135 mile demos that you can get on the internet off the Sesame Street website. And then you're going out and seeing the spaces. Then you're going out and negotiating, having no idea what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. Then it's like, oh, wait a minute, how much is this going to cost me? Or at least you hope they at least ask themselves that, 'cause I've seen them where they don't even do that. They're smart enough to figure out how long it's going to take to get the permit, how long it's going to take, to finish up the construction. And then they get the lease. Oh, well, wait a minute, I need an attorney. Well, hopefully they're getting an attorney that has experience, in commercial real estate contracts. I saw this, the worst one I've ever saw was the tenant hired a medical attorney. It was a joke. And it killed the deal. Because, he was telling his client they needed to negotiate for this, and it just wasn't correct. And of course, the client's going to listen to the attorney because it's the attorney. You just look like the broker is just trying to ramrod the deal so you can get your fee. And so then you go through the lease negotiation. Okay, you sign if you sign, but then again, everything starts again with, what contractor am I using? What time period am I doing? How do I start dealing with the city? So the steps I just named, overwhelming majority is what brokers are going to go through too, but just with a lot more skill, a lot more foresight, a lot more market knowledge to back, the decisions, analytics to back decisions, and so forth.
And we haven't really touched on the references that we bring to other professionals in the space, which is a critical component, right? David just talked about attorneys. You hire the wrong attorney, you're shooting yourself in the foot, and they can outright kill a deal. We've seen that many times where attorneys that don't have experience in negotiating retail deals come in and try to prove how smart they are and, come in with good intent. They're trying to serve their client's interests, but they don't know, what they can and can't get. And they don't know what is and is not standard in retail practice. And so they'll come in and implode a deal just trying to play the hero. We've seen that quite a bit. And so, getting them to somebody that has negotiated a lot of retail transactions who will negotiate hard on their behalf, but not take unreasonable stands that are going to, kill the deal. Contractors and, there's all sorts of nuances that come into a deal where we have to make, recommendations, and we're going to recommend people that know what they're doing.
So we're looking at someone looking to find space. They're not seeing everything on the market, as we talked about. They're guessing on the market. More importantly, in a market like today where we keep mentioning that it's a super tight inventory market, they just can't go wherever they want, right? They've got to find locations that are available, beat out competition in a lot of cases. And so they really need an advocate to help them do that. And I don't think they know enough about the cost of space as well. Like if they needed to do finish out, if they needed to get something done. And then, we mentioned about market rates, different submarkets, certain corridors, certain shopping centers. I mean, it varies so much, even in a small area. And then when they get the lease, right, can be super complicated, especially if it's a long form built by the landlord and if they're a much more sophisticated owner. A lot of people don't expect the construction timing and permitting process and things like that too, right? During any of these notches, do you have any deal stories that stick out to you in your memory?
Well, I've got one that just came up yesterday. A broker in our office is working on a deal and they're negotiating an LOI right now. And the owner is quoting $32 plus $7 a foot in triple nets for a brand new development in a nice area. And you look around at other comparable centers around there, all of their triple nets are, $11.50, $12.50.
I was going to say that sounded pretty low.
And you see this actually relatively frequently on new development stuff. They're basing their taxes on, unimproved land, and they're throwing that in there as the tax component. Well, the good broker this person he's telling his client, no, you budget for $12 a foot here, because you're going to get in there and a year later, you're going to get a reconciliation notice from the owner saying, oh, well, taxes went up to $12 a foot.
Or even worse, if it's a merchant developer, and they sell for, at least before these ungodly cap rates, but they're still, how do you sell for a 5-6 cap? All of a sudden they reassess the value and it goes from, even if it's at a 12, it's going to go up to a 20, especially if it's a smaller building without economies of scale. So, to prepare them for that.
Yeah. So that is, certainly, I'm glad that our broker was handling it that way, and a good broker will do that. They're not just looking to make the deal and get their fee, but they're looking to build a relationship and be that person's client for a long time. And so, I think the person's still going to go through with the deal because the site worked for them, but they're going into it with eyes wide open and budgeting for $12 nets and not $7.
On a different topic, I'm sure you've seen this where clients that are out there, they don't have a commitment to one broker. Those types of clients think they're casting a much wider net because they're working with like all of the brokers in the market.
Yes, I mean, and this is, talking on the assumption of we're talking apples to apples, as far as the quality of the brokers. Yeah, I've heard that time and time again. He's like, why am I just going to use one broker when I can use three? And the answer is time, value, money. These brokers know in the back of their head that they could do their jobs perfectly as far as looking for space. And then one of the three just happens to come across, something his uncle owns. He gets protected. And then that, broker that's been working, so hard, doesn't get anything. So yeah, it's just going to be, where water travels, the easiest, in the sense that, they're not going to go out there. They're not going to cold call spaces. They're not going to, check with the tenant or check with the landlord rep and say, hey, is that dry cleaner weak? Can we put in our smoothie concept? They're not going to do any of that stuff. If they happen to come across something, great. And if not, no problem. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Now, there are some younger brokers. When I say younger, I mean, career-wise, whose pipelines are so low that they'll take the chance. They'll take a risk and they'll go out there and they'll look, even without the protection of an exclusive. But those are very few and far between. They're usually, God bless them, they're usually not the most qualified brokers. So even if they find the space, they're not going to be the best ones to negotiate the deal. If you find the right broker, you give them the exclusive. And again, the right broker, and you give them the exclusive. He knows that his time and his knowledge is protected. And so he'll go out there, especially in these type markets, he'll go out there and, he's not just looking for window signs to say for lease. He's not going on LoopNet. He has to do those things, but he also has to do all the other things, to bring all the spaces to his client that are available. He has to have that protection of, if a deal's going to happen, I'm going to be protected on it.
Certainly there became a point in my career where I just wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to go out and do the work without the assurance that my work was going to lead somewhere, and you never have that assurance as a broker. You're always taking a risk because, if the client doesn't do a deal, if they, go out of business or whatever, you're not guaranteed anything, of course. But, to add into the idea that somebody else could, just bring them a deal and I'm not protected on it. It was not worth my time. And there were other people that would give me that guarantee, so David touched on our analytics department, which is no small piece of the puzzle when we're looking for sites for folks. That is a huge component, and I'll let David elaborate on that in a second, but also just the tools that a larger brokerage has, right? Like we invest a ton of money into tools and, tools like Placer, AI, which is cell phone data, and it will give you all sorts of intelligence on, not just how many people are going to a site, but what type of people are going to that site, where they're coming from and where they are going to after being at that site, which is huge information for a retailer. Just one anecdotal piece. It was a client of ours, had a hard and fast, they didn't want to be within 5 miles of another one of their stores. We're talking about central Houston here where, drive times can be like, 25 minutes between 5 mile radiuses. And, but they just could not wrap. It was actually on the same street, which I think also was playing in psychologically to them, like, oh, place another location on the same street, 3.5 miles away from each other. And we said, there is such a small amount of potential cannibalization between these two stores. And we talked about a psychological barrier. We said, at Westheimer, that's a psychological barrier. People are not going down this street to get to, there's nothing there. And we kept telling them that, and they kind of believed us, but, they couldn't get over. And, we pulled it up on Placer, and it basically showed what we were saying. It's like no one is traveling on a regular basis past this dividing line. And it showed it in such stark terms, and it corroborated what we had said. And that was the piece, right? And they said, oh yeah, and they ended up going through with the store, and the store ended up being a top performer in the market for them, and, not hurting their other store at all. And, And certainly there are times where we're wrong also, and we look at that data and we say, okay, maybe we need to rethink this. Maybe our opinion is not valid. And I've certainly had those experiences too. So, it helps educate us as well. But more often than not, we're right.
David, could you touch on that a little more, just so that, we could kind of explain just a glimpse of what we're doing with information, how important that is, especially in today's market?
Absolutely. So, it's all about how much client data you can get, both hard data and anecdotal. And so the best kind of data we can get are spreadsheet with current customers that are at currently operating units, addresses, the gold standard. But even if we just get zip codes, that's really a great second place. And what we're able to do is we're able to reverse engineer the data that we get through a process called tapestry segmentation. Tapestry segmentation, let me sort of branch off a little bit. Tapestry segmentation, there's basically 70 different categories that represent certain components of the U.S. consumer culture, population. And so, there's, like I said, 70 different categories. So you see how nuanced it gets. It's demographics, it's psychographics, customer segmentation, it's consumer buying behaviors. When we take this data that we get from clients and we reverse engineer it, and we're able to come up with the top 3 buckets. I call them buckets, each of these categories. We're able to come up with the top 3 buckets that best represent our clients' customers. And then, so when we go into a market, we're able to overlay data that shows, where, buckets are in that market, the highest concentration thereof, and if their customer is David, then we're looking for the highest concentration of Davids, which we identified during the tapestry segmentation process. We're able to ascertain drive time radiuses, as Martin was touching on, as far as how long on average people are willing to travel time-wise to get to these units. So, these buckets, these categories, these colors, those are your targets. And then the drive time radius is your boundary lines. And then we're able to age the data 5 years into the future to say, okay, is it a great location today? Great. But is it going to be a great location tomorrow? Is there a gentrification process? What's going on? And so with that, we're able to identify the highest concentration of the customers. From there, we can tell you store capacity in the market and approximate spacing of those areas. From there, we combine the two, and we're able to lay out a blueprint, for the rollout. As far as how many zones, we rank the zones from greatest to least. We put the drive time radiuses around the numbers, to show, spacing, cannibalization, all the above. And there's plenty of others, tools that we can get into later on. And then the yin to the yang is the geofencing. Our cell phones are beacons. And so there's no way to shut it off. There's no settings. You can shut down your phone. They're still tracking you. The only way I think you can get them to stop tracking you is, if you take like the high action thriller movies where you take off the back of your phone and you throw it out the car window. And that's the only way you're going to get them to stop tracking you. And these companies like Placer, they're buying this information from T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T. It is refreshed daily. That is revolutionary in the analytics field, have information data refreshed daily. And so, as Martin touched upon, what is geofencing? Telling us where people are coming from, where they're going to afterwards, the roads most traveled to get there, and then, where people are going exactly and how long they're staying there. And with all that information coupled with the tapestry segmentation models, it's exciting stuff.
Is there like an example of who we're working with right now with the analytics?
Yeah. So my favorite story is we had a brand new pizza client come to us about 7 months ago, 4 units. 1 out of the 4 was doing poorly. Didn't make any sense. It checked all the boxes that the other 3 did. And so again, geofencing, that last component I was talking about, they're logging us as far as where we're going and how long we're staying. We ran that study, and this is a sit-down concept. We ran the study on his 4th unit that was poor performing. And what it showed was, on average, the customers were staying 35 minutes less than the other 3 units, and they weren't returning. That told us it was a management issue. It wasn't cannibalization, it wasn't the market, it wasn't the real estate. It was a management issue. And so the big boss man went in there, cleared house, put in a new management team, and now the 4th unit does just as well, if not better, than the other 3. We didn't make any money in that scenario because there was no new real estate to be done as far as relocating that unit, and so forth. But, at least we were able to show the client that, again, management versus real estate, additional mistakes weren't made, and, the problem was able to be identified and then solved.
What about takeaways? Like, let's share some final takeaways as we wrap up.
Use the experts. Use the experts in brokerage, use the experts in construction, use the experts, with attorneys, have the relationships with the brokers that can direct you to relationships with contractors and attorneys. And, you don't know what you don't know. This is a very complicated process to get that location. I remember one story where this dry cleaner was on an end cap, a prominent end cap, bigger space too. He's doing a plant, and, he decided he didn't need that plant anymore. He relocated within the shopping center, took a third of the space. No brainer, right? The same shopping center, a third of the space, rock and roll. His business went down over 35% when he made that move off the end cap into inline. So again, it's just such a nuanced business. I'm not saying that, finding office space or industrial space isn't complicated with its own set of skills and expertise. But like Martin touched upon earlier, it just seems to be with ours, there's a lot more details, access, parking, visibility, tenants that, are in the shopping center, the anchors, the co-tenants. The whole ever-loving reason to go into a shopping center is to capitalize off the marketing efforts and the traffic being brought in by the other tenants. I've run into clients that want to be seen as the customers are going into the Target, or the Walmart. And then I've had clients that, where they want the customers, to come out of the Target. They want them to see them. So it's very nuanced.
And the only thing I would amend from use the experts is use the experts in your field that suit your business and what you're looking for. So, it's not just, looking up and seeing, okay, who is the top producing broker in our market? Well, that might be the worst possible broker for you if you are looking for a 1,500 square foot barber salon. Yeah, right? It's got to be somebody that is an expert in your space that knows all of the opportunities in your area and is going to go out and hustle for you, because hustle is half of the process. Obviously expertise is huge, but also somebody who's willing to put in the work for it. That top producing broker in the market is going to have no interest in your 1,500 square foot, inline space. And so, it's who's working deals in that space. And that's the expert for your business.
And we recently dealt with a retired cop. He literally just retired, 20 years, NYPD. And, his whole pension was going into this, ice cream concept. And, the location that the local market broker showed him, again, same story, right? Really tight market. So they finally, or it's $50 a square foot. So they finally find a location that checks both boxes, except it wasn't the right location. So thankfully, the consultant got down there for the franchisee. He got down there and he's like, this is not the place to go. He's like, all the traffic is one intersection up. He's like, there's, you got to go down there at night and everything. There's no traffic. And I thank God we didn't do that deal. I mean, here's a cop, 20 years of pension, just going one block off the intersection of where he needed to be. It made it real for me.
And that does it for our episode today. So before we go, don't forget to subscribe to the RESOLUT REveal podcast to stay informed on market trends, success stories, and actionable insights in commercial real estate. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and other social media platforms. If you're ready to partner with us to maximize value on your property, find the perfect space for your business, or have any questions, don't hesitate to find us at www.resolutre.com. That's RESOLUTRE.com. This was the RESOLUT REveal podcast, where real insights lead to real results. We'll see you next time.